People like to call loyalty a sacred instinct among wolves, but courts taught a harsher truth. Loyalty survived only where power allowed it. In halls built of carved stone and old vows, grief could be measured, traded, and weaponized before the body was cold. Rowena Stormborn learned that lesson with one hand over the child beneath her ribs and the other clenched around a promise she had not wanted to keep. Hope still existed, but it had teeth. It demanded movement when the heart begged to collapse. It demanded she run while love was still warm on her skin. Rain hammered the glass of the mourning chamber at Frostborn Court, each strike sharp as thrown gravel. Rowena stood in a black dress that no longer fit properly over her 5-month belly, her lower back throbbing, her temples hot from too little sleep and too much weeping. The room smelled of stale incense, wet wool, and the bitter herbs the healers insisted would settle her nausea. They did nothing. Outside her door, 3 council voices rose and fell without bothering to lower themselves for privacy. "She cannot remain in the upper wing," said Lord Carow, clipped and impatient. "Her rank came through her husband, and he is gone." "She is carrying his child," Lady Maris replied. "That still has value." A third voice, smooth and cruel, answered with a laugh. "Value, yes, not authority. Move her to the lower wards. Fewer witnesses when decisions are made." Rowena closed her eyes and pressed both palms to the swell of her stomach until the baby shifted once, a small rolling protest that made her throat tighten. Grief sat inside her like cold iron. Anger sat beneath it, brighter and less stable. They had begun this within hours of Aldrich's death. Condolences in public, calculations in private. She had been Luna by marriage for less than a year, accepted slowly and never fully by a court that saw her coastal bloodline as decorative at best, suspect at worst. Aldrich had been the only one who treated her as a partner rather than an acquisition, and now his pyre smoke had barely thinned over the river before they started circling. The door opened without a knock. Steward Halden entered with 2 servants carrying chests. "We are relocating your belongings," he said, avoiding her eyes. "You were told to wait until dawn." "I was told to obey the council." Rowena straightened despite the pull along her spine. "Leave the chest by the hearth. I will sort what I keep." Halden's mouth flattened. "You misunderstand your position." One of the servants, too young to hide his discomfort, paused with folded blankets in his arms. The other looked at Rowena's belly and then quickly away, as if even seeing her had become a risk. Halden stepped closer and lowered his voice. "The court has tolerated your dramatics because Lord Aldrich favored you. That protection ended with him. If you cooperate, your child will be provided for. If you do not, decisions will be made without your consent." The words were polished, administrative, and filthy. Rowena held his gaze until he looked away first. "Get out of my chamber." His nostrils flared. "By sunset, this room is no longer yours." When they left, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing through the tremor in her hands. Her mind skittered between practical tasks and old memories, with no mercy in the transitions. The way Aldrich had laughed when she burned stew in the first month of their marriage. The way he had kissed her knuckles before council sessions as if she were the brave one. The way he had whispered, 2 nights ago in the dim map room, that someone had breached kitchen stores across 3 territories, all with the same tasteless powder that stopped hearts slowly enough to mimic illness. "If it reaches Shadowfang Keep," he had said, "Jasper dies before winter, and the realm fractures." She had tried to argue, tried to make him wait for proof solid enough to survive politics. He had pressed a signet ring into her palm, heavy silver set with storm glass, his own bloodline crest around the edge. "If anything happens, go to him yourself. Do not trust sealed couriers. Do not trust anyone who says wait." At the memory, her throat burned. She crossed to the washing basin, splashed water over her face, and stared at her reflection. hollowed eyes, damp dark hair escaping its braid. A woman who looked older than 24. In her mind, the present narrowed to commands, stark and relentless. Stay upright. Keep breathing. Keep the child calm. You can break later. You can break where no one sees. Not here. Not while they are measuring your life in bargaining terms. By nightfall, the court had moved her to a chamber beside the storage corridors. No hearth, no latch on the inside. Her escort, for safety, stood outside the door and smelled of cheap wine and resentment. She lay fully dressed on a thin mattress, listening to footsteps above and below, counting the hours by changing shifts and distant bells. Sometime after midnight, she woke to voices in the corridor and the unmistakable scrape of steel against stone. Not the lazy gait of centuries. Coordinated movement, 4, maybe 5, then a muffled shout, a crash, running. Her door slammed open and Aldrich stumbled in, one sleeve dark with blood, breath ragged. Up, he said. Now. Rowena was already moving, dragging on boots, grabbing the travel cloak she had kept packed since his warning. What happened? Council guard has been replaced, not ours. His eyes found her belly, softened for one fractured second, then hardened again. They came for you first. Two figures appeared behind him at the threshold, faces wrapped, blades drawn. Aldrich shoved a table into their path and yanked Rowena toward the rear wall where old service paneling disguised a narrow passage used by kitchen staff generations ago. He kicked it open. Go, he ordered. She caught his wrist. With me. His expression was the closest thing to despair she had ever seen on him. If we both run, we both die in the corridor. Listen to me. He pressed the signet ring into her hand so hard the edge bit her skin. Shadowfang Keep. To Jasper Shadowfang himself. Tell him the poison has reached the North Roots, and kitchen vendors were bought through Black Ledger accounts. Say it exactly. He will understand. She shook her head, vision blurring. Aldrich? Rowena. He cupped her face, forehead to hers for one heartbeat. I love you. Run. He turned before she could answer and drove into the doorway. Shoulder first, wolf force behind the strike. Wood splintered. Men cursed. Metal rang. Rowena stood frozen for a breath that felt like treason, then forced herself into the passage and pulled the panel shut from the inside. The corridor beyond was pitch dark, smelling of dust, old tallow, and damp stone. She moved by touch, one hand on the wall, the other over her mouth to quiet sobs that kept breaking through anyway. Behind her came thuds, shouts, then a sound she would hear in sleep for the rest of her life. Aldrich's voice, hoarse and furious, cut short mid-word. She made no sound at all. The silence cost her more than screaming would have. The service tunnel spilled out behind the smokehouse near the eastern stables. Rain knifed down in silver sheets, flattening the courtyard and swallowing visibility. She kept her hood low and her stride uneven, trying to mimic a servant carrying scraps. At the stable gate, old Marta, the head groom who had once slipped Rowena candied ginger when morning sickness made her faint, looked up from a lantern and went still. Marta took in Rowena's face, the cloak, the blood on her cuff, and said only, Bay mare in stall 6, fast and steady. Go north by the river cut. Rowena grabbed her forearm in thanks. Marta squeezed once and shoved a wrapped bundle into her hands. Bread, dried meat, 2 skin flasks. Do not stop where there is firelight, Marta said. If anyone asks, I never saw you. Rowena mounted with shaking legs and rode into rain so cold it felt like punishment. Behind her, Frostborn's tower lights blurred to gold smears through water and tears. Ahead lay 3 days of forest, 2 ruined bridges, and territories that shifted allegiance with each season. She rode bent low over the mare's neck, whispering apologies to the child with every hard jolt. Morning came gray and hostile. By the second day, her thighs burned, lips cracked, and every scent sharpened into nausea. She crossed a flooded ford up to the mare's chest, slipped once on black stone, and slammed her palm against the saddle pommel. The signet ring, clenched in that hand since midnight, sliced deeper into the skin between thumb and forefinger. She hissed, looked down, and saw a thin line of blood where the storm-glass edge had opened her. The cut should have been trivial. It began to burn within the hour. Heat crawled up her arm in slow, deliberate waves, then settled behind her eyes. By dusk she was shivering and sweating at once, vision tunneling at the edges. Poison, she thought with sick clarity. The ring. They had tainted even this. She almost laughed at the elegance of it. Kill the messenger through the message. By the time Shadowfang territory markers appeared, carved obsidian posts etched with moon runes, she could barely keep the mare straight. Pines rose in black columns on either side of the pass, and the mountain wind carried the scent of snow and wood smoke from the keep above. Wolves tracked her from the ridgeline, huge shadows pacing parallel through trees, never attacking, never retreating. At the first gate, armored sentries lowered spears. "Halt, and name yourself." "Rowena Stormborn," she rasped. "From Frostborn Court, I need your king." The taller guard narrowed his eyes. "The king is not summoned by strangers." She swayed in the saddle and fought the urge to slump. "Then fetch whoever commands your kitchens. Now." Poison roots from the north were compromised. Black ledger purchases. If you wait for protocol, people die. The guards exchanged a glance that carried more calculation than disbelief. One whistled sharp. A runner broke toward the inner wall. They took her mare and flanked her through rising courtyards of black stone and torchlight, past training yards slick with rain and packs of wolves who watched with unnerving stillness. Shadowfang Keep was less palace than fortress, built to survive siege and winter both. Every arch seemed carved from the mountain itself. Every corridor smelled of cedar, iron, and discipline. By the time they reached the throne hall, her knees threatened mutiny. The doors opened inward to reveal a vast chamber lit by hanging braziers, banners dark as storm clouds, and a raised dais where Jasper Shadowfang stood in council leathers, listening to a strategist beside a map table. He was taller than Rumor, broader through the shoulders, silver-threaded black hair pulled from his face, expression unreadable in a way that made lesser men seem noisy by comparison. Power moved around him like cold weather, not performative, simply present. Conversations died when she entered. Dozens of eyes turned toward the dripping, mud-streaked stranger with one hand braced under her belly and the other bleeding onto a silver signet. She took 3 steps, then 4, each one a negotiation with dizziness. "Your Majesty," she said, voice cracking, "the poison that killed my husband has been smuggled into your kitchens. Check preserved stocks and salt barrels from the northern caravans. Trusted vendors were bought through Black Ledger accounts. Do not drink anything sealed after first thaw unless witnessed from source." The hall held stillness so complete she could hear brazier oil popping. Jasper descended 1 step from the dais. His gaze flicked to the ring in her hand, then to the blood seeping from her cut, and sharpened. "Who did this to you?" Rowena tried to answer. The floor heaved sideways. Heat roared through her skull, and the edges of the room dissolved into white noise. "Physicians!" Jasper snapped, his voice suddenly everywhere. "Now! And lock down every kitchen entrance. No vessel leaves, no servant exits. No fire is lit until I say." She felt her body tilt and expected stone. Instead, there was an arm like a steel band catching her before impact, the scent of cedar smoke and winter rain striking through fever just as darkness surged up and took her whole. Darkness did not arrive as silence. It arrived as fragments. Hands lifting her. Orders carved into stone. The violent rhythm of her own pulse in her ears. Then heat. endless and punishing, dragging her through fever where every memory sharpened into a blade. Aldrich at the map table, tracing trade routes with ink-stained fingers. Aldrich at the passage door, blood on his sleeve, telling her to run. Torches in frostborn corridors, rain swallowing hoofbeats, the ring cutting deeper and deeper as if metal had learned hunger. Somewhere beyond the fever, voices argued over her body in clipped, exhausted turns. Poison entered through the wound, not enough to kill if we can keep the child stable. She has already crossed that threshold. Then drag her back. Another voice cut through all of them, low and absolute. You do not stop. When she floated upward, the voice was always there, giving updates, demanding doses be checked twice, rejecting sleep as though sleep were a luxury reserved for lesser stakes. Once, through the haze, she felt cool fingers against her wrist, counting. Once, she heard someone begging him to eat. Your Majesty, you will collapse. Then I will collapse in this chair. Days folded into each other without edges. She drifted in and out of dreams that were not dreams, trapped between fire and ice, one hand forever reaching for a man she could no longer reach. Her body ached as if every bone had been unstrung and tied again. The baby moved sometimes, faint but insistent, and those moments became anchors she clung to with feral focus. Stay, stay with me. I am still here. You are still here. When she finally broke the surface for good, it was to the smell of cedar smoke, winter rain, and broth gone cool in an untouched bowl. Her eyelids felt weighted, but she forced them open. A vaulted ceiling of dark beams came into focus first, then heavy curtains stitched with silver runes, then the figure seated beside her bed with one elbow on his knee and a tray balanced on a low table within arm's reach. Bread, broth, venison sliced thin, all untouched, as if placed there for ceremony rather than use. Jasper Shadowfang looked less like a king and more like a man carved down to raw intention. Stubble shadowed his jaw. His cheekbones stood sharper than she remembered from the throne hall. His eyes were fixed on her with such unblinking intensity that for one disoriented second she wondered whether she was still fevered. You're awake, he said, and the roughness in his voice sounded like a wound. Her throat scraped when she tried to speak. How long? 12 days. The number landed in her chest with brutal weight. The child? He stood so quickly the chair legs grated across stone, then stopped himself from reaching for her, both hands tightening at his sides instead. Heartbeat steady. Smaller movements when your fever spiked. Stronger today. The healers watched in shifts. I watched when they failed to see what mattered. He turned, poured water from a carafe into a cup, and held it out. He waited until she lifted her hand before moving closer. Even in weakness, she noticed that pause, the deliberate ask without words. When her fingers trembled too hard to grip, he slid one hand beneath her wrist to steady the cup, nothing more. The water hit her tongue like mercy. She took 2 careful swallows and then, by instinct older than language, inhaled him fully. Cedar smoke, winter rain, and beneath both, a bright metallic note that struck her blood like lightning finding a storm rod. Heat pulsed beneath her skin so suddenly she flinched. Her pulse leapt. Awareness prickled along her spine, every nerve sharpening until she could hear the minute catch in his breathing. See the way his pupils widened. Watch amber bleed into his irises in slow, stunned expansion. Ancient runes along his forearms lit one by one under the skin, molten lines threading from wrist to elbow as if some hidden script had waited centuries for this exact breath. Jasper made a sound low in his throat. Not a growl, not human either, reverent and dangerous at once. Rowena's hand jerked, water sloshing over her knuckles, and the room tilted into a second kind of fever. Grief surged up, immediate and savage, Aldrich's face, Aldrich's last words, the child beneath her ribs, the life he died protecting. Yet alongside that grief came another force, fierce and undeniable, pulling toward the man standing inches away, as if a cord had been flung between them and cinched tight. No, no, this cannot be now. Not like this. Not while he is still ash in my mouth. She tried to pull her wrist back. Jasper released her instantly and stepped away, chest rising hard. "Rowena," he said, each syllable controlled by effort, "look at me." She did, because not looking felt more dangerous. Their gazes locked. The runes on his arms brightened. At the center of her chest, just below the sternum, a deep thrum answered, spreading outward in hot, rippling waves. For one impossible second she saw it. A fine strand of pale fire stretching from him to her, trembling in the dim light like moonlight hammered into wire. He saw it too. She knew from the way his expression changed, stripped clean of strategy and rank, and every shield he had worn on that dais. "The bond," she whispered. He nodded once, almost violently. "Ancient, not summoned, not negotiated." Tears burned behind her eyes, anger and terror and need colliding so fast she could not separate them. "My husband died 12 days ago. I know. I loved him. I know." "And this," she said, pressing a shaking palm to her chest where the thrum would not quiet. "This feels like betrayal." Jasper's jaw tightened. The amber in his gaze held, fierce and pained. "Betrayal would be lying to you about what this is." Silence stretched, charged and trembling. Outside, wind pressed against the shutters in a long, low sigh. Inside, the thread between them hummed like a living thing. He dropped to one knee beside the bed. Not submission, exactly. A chosen lowering that put his eyes level with hers and left space between their bodies. "You are mine to protect," he said, voice steady despite the strain etched through him. "Never to own." The words struck deeper than the bond itself. No claim, no command. No demand that fate erased mourning. Just a vow framed as duty freely chosen. Rowena closed her eyes and let one tear fall. When she opened them again, he was still there, still kneeling, waiting rather than taking. That waiting unsettled her more than any display of power could have. A healer entered then, glanced once at the lit runes on Jasper's arms, and stopped short with a quiet gasp. Jasper did not turn. "Out," he said. The healer retreated without argument. Rowena drew a slow breath, then another, learning the new shape of the room, the new shape of herself inside it. The thrum eased from wildfire to banked coals, present but no longer blinding. Exhaustion swept in behind it, heavy and inescapable. "I can't decide anything tonight," she murmured. "You will not be asked to." His answer came with no hesitation. He stood, moved the untouched tray aside, and adjusted the blankets with careful hands that never crossed into assumption. When he reached the edge of the bed, he paused. "May I check the bandage on your hand?" She nodded. He unwound the linen wrapped around the cut between her thumb and forefinger. The wound was cleaner than she expected, edges pink rather than angry black. Poison scars mapped faint silver lines up the inside of her wrist. His thumb hovered near them but did not touch. "The toxin burned deep," he said. "It missed your bloodstream by less than an hour. You were brought here at the exact edge. By luck." His mouth shifted, something too grim to be a smile. By stubbornness. That evening, after broth she managed to keep down and tonic she hated, a maid brought a basin of warm water and left quickly, eyes lowered in the particular way of someone who had heard too many rumors and did not trust any of them. Rowena washed as best she could from the bed, then stared at her reflection in a polished steel mirror propped against the table. Her hair hung in damp, uneven ropes, rain tangles from 12 days ago now matted at the nape. She lifted both arms to braid it and nearly dropped them from fatigue. A knock sounded once against the doorframe. Jasper stood there with a folded blanket over one arm. "I am sleeping outside this chamber tonight," he said, "and every night until you tell me otherwise." She blinked at him. "On stone." "It is warm enough in this corridor." A small, incredulous sound escaped her before she could stop it. "Your court will call that theater." "My court can survive disappointment." He set the blanket on a bench near the door and turned to leave. Rowena heard herself speak first. "I cannot get my hands to work." He looked back. She gestured weakly at her hair, embarrassed by the request and more embarrassed by how much she wanted not to fight this alone for one mundane human minute. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. He crossed the room slowly, each movement announced, as if approaching a wounded animal that deserved clarity. He took the comb from the table and knelt behind her chair. His fingers were large, built for sword hilts and governance. Yet he moved through the knots with patient precision, never pulling hard enough to hurt. The room filled with quiet sounds, comb teeth sliding, fabric rustling, her own breath gradually evening out. No one had touched her like this since childhood, and certainly not a king feared for treating tenderness as inefficiency. When he finished, he secured the braid with a plain leather tie and stepped around to face her. His gaze dropped, asking permission again with nothing but posture. Rowena hesitated, then lifted her chin once. Jasper lowered himself carefully until he was at the height of her belly. He placed his palm an inch away, waiting. She covered his wrist with her hand and guided him closer. Warmth spread through the thin fabric of her nightdress where his hand rested over the child. His voice changed when he spoke. Rough edges gone, reverence in their place. "Little heart, I do not know your name yet, but I know your mother crossed death to bring warning to this keep. I swear to guard both heartbeats under this roof with equal ferocity. No bargain over one, no sacrifice of one for the other. Both." The baby shifted under his hand, a decisive roll that made Rowena gasp. Jasper stilled, eyes widening in startled wonder, then looked up at her as if she had handed him a miracle he did not know how to hold. "I felt that," he whispered. "Yes," she said, and the word came out broken in a way she did not resent. Later, in the deepest part of night, nightmare took her by the throat. She was back in the passage, wood panel at her spine, Aldrich shouting her name from the other side as steel struck stone. She clawed at invisible walls, could not move, could not breathe. The baby kicked hard, panic echoing panic, and she woke with a cry trapped behind her teeth. A shadow moved at the doorway. Jasper was there instantly but stopped at the threshold. "Rowena," he said, voice low, "you are in Shadowfang Keep. You are in your chamber. Look at the lamp beside you." She forced her eyes open wider. Brass lamp, blue glass, carved wolf at the base. "Good," he said. "Now the blanket. Tell me the texture." "Wool," she rasped. "Coarse." "Good. Match my breathing. 4 counts in, 4 out." She tried and failed on the first 2 attempts. He did not rush her. He breathed audibly, steady as tide. She followed, trembling, then less. He remained where he was, hands visible, no movement toward her until she lifted her own hand in a small, shaky invitation. Only then did he approach. He sat on the edge of the chair, not the bed, and offered his forearm rather than his palm. She gripped it until the tremors passed. "I am here. I am here. I am not in that corridor. He is gone, and I am still here. I can hate that truth and still breathe." When dawn finally thinned the dark at the shutters, Rowena had slept in fragments and Jasper had not slept at all. By afternoon, he insisted she attend court for 1 hour, not for spectacle, but for precedent. "If you vanish," he said, fastening the clasp of his cloak with one hand while reading 3 dispatches with the other, "others will define your absence as weakness. You choose whether they do." She chose to go. The throne hall looked colder by daylight, all basalt pillars and silver inlay, banners hanging motionless in the still air. Jasper took his seat on the dais. Rowena sat one step below and to his right in a high-backed chair brought from his own private council room, its arms carved to support her weight comfortably. The adjustment did not go unnoticed. Neither did the 2 sentries he reassigned from outer gate to stand behind her chair. Petitions proceeded. Grain tariffs, border patrol rotations, a dispute over winter grazing rights. Rowena listened, learning names and fault lines while pain ebbed and returned in low waves through her back. Then, Lady Sable Carow requested the floor, flanked by Lord Carow and Councillor Venn, all 3 wrapped in expensive restraint. Your Majesty, Lady Carow began, voice sweetened to near poison. We speak from concern for stability. Your guest has suffered greatly and no one questions her loss. Yet the keep is not arranged for a delicate condition in such proximity to military councils. Lower wards offer quieter rooms, fewer stressors, greater safety for mother and child. Venn inclined his head, feigning respect. Until paternity and political implications are formally reviewed, temporary seclusion would protect everyone from unfortunate misunderstandings. Rowena felt the hall shift around her, dozens of faces suddenly intent. Not one word overtly cruel. Every word a cage. Jasper did not answer at first. He rose from the throne with frightening calm, descended the steps, and crossed to Rowena's chair. He placed his hand over her belly in full view of the court, possessive only in the legal sense, an unmistakable line drawn in public. When he spoke, the room seemed to contract around the sound. Listen carefully, because I will not repeat myself. Rowena Stormborn is under my personal protection and under ancient guest right recognized by Crown and Pack law older than any title in this room. Her child is protected by the same law. Any insult, threat, or attempt to constrain either of them without her consent will be treated as treason against this crown. Lady Carow opened her mouth. Jasper cut her off with a glance sharp enough to silence steel. You invoked safety as pretext for confinement. You invoked implication as pretext for erasure. You will now experience consequence as correction. He turned to the chamber scribe. Record this decree. By authority of the Shadowfang throne, Lady Sable Carow, Lord Carow, and Councillor Venn are stripped of speaking privileges in royal court for 1 full moon cycle under statute of guest right violation. Their petitions are suspended. Their proxies are denied. A collective inhale rippled through the benches. The sanction was surgical and devastating. Not a theatrical rebuke, but institutional force, entered into law where it could not be politely forgotten. Lord Carow stepped forward despite himself. Your Majesty, this is excessive. Jasper's gaze went feral for 1 hard second, predator surfacing behind discipline. Excessive would have been exile. Sit down. Carow sat. Proceedings resumed, but nothing returned to normal. Every noble in that hall recalculated in real time, and Rowena felt the recalculation like a weather front moving through stone. Jasper had not merely defended her in passing. He had rebuilt the rulebook around her survival, and done it where everyone who mattered had to witness. When court adjourned, she expected him to stride away into strategy meetings and war reports. Instead, he walked beside her at her pace through the western colonnade, late light spilling over black stone and turning the runes in the floor to dull silver. You did not have to burn political capital on me, she said quietly. He did not look at her immediately. Capital can be regained, a life cannot. You barely know me. His jaw flexed. I know enough. They reached a balcony overlooking the lower training grounds where young wolves ran drills in disciplined loops. Shouts rose, then faded on the wind. Rowena rested both hands on the carved rail and watched her breath cloud in the cool air. Trust was not a gate that swung open because a man said the right words. Trust was slow, stubborn architecture, stone by stone, proof by proof. Yet when she replayed the last 24 hours, the pattern held. He had waited for permission. He had slept outside her door. He had steadied her through terror without claiming access to her body or grief. He had used law, not just force, to make her harder to target. The bond still hummed under her skin, volatile and bright, but something else had begun beside it, quieter and perhaps more dangerous in the long run, the first deliberate lowering of her guard. Rowena turned her head toward him, met his amber gaze, and did not look away. "Thank you," she said. Jasper inclined his head, solemn as an oath. "Eat with me tonight." Not command, invitation. After a beat, she nodded. "All right. All right." The words settled between them with the weight of a pact, and Jasper gave a short nod as if he understood exactly how much effort it had cost her to offer even that small trust. He led her through a side passage instead of returning to the main corridors, choosing narrow stairwells and servant turns that kept them away from lingering courtiers. By the time they reached a private dining chamber overlooking the inner courtyard, dusk had deepened into indigo, and snow mist drifted in thin veils over the training stones below. The meal waiting for them was simple: root stew, roasted pheasant, dark bread, poached pears in spiced wine reduction. No ceremonial silver, no audience. 2 place settings, equal in arrangement. Jasper pulled out her chair himself, then took the seat across from her rather than beside, giving her distance the way other men offered flattery. For several minutes they ate in quiet, their conversation restrained to practical things: how her fever had broken, which tonic no longer made her gag, whether the child moved more after warm broth. It felt almost ordinary, and the almost of it made her chest ache. Then the door opened without warning. A woman in deep green velvet entered with the confidence of someone who had never been denied access to any room in this keep. She was striking, not in a soft way, but in the polished way of court steel, dark hair pinned with obsidian combs, throat wrapped in heirloom black pearls that marked old northern blood. Her smile appeared first for Jasper, then recalibrated when she took in Rowena seated at his table. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing with precise grace. "Forgive the interruption. The grain requisition from East Ridge requires your seal tonight, and Steward Talbot said you had withdrawn." Jasper did not rise. "Lady Evangeline Blackwood, this is not a council hour." Evangeline turned to Rowena at last, eyes cool and assessing. "Lady Rowena, we have not yet been introduced properly. Shadowfang welcomes guests with more ceremony under normal circumstances." The sentence was perfectly courteous and intentionally edged. Guest, temporary, contingent. Rowena set down her spoon. "I have learned Shadowfang also welcomes truth quickly. I appreciate efficiency." Something flickered behind Evangeline's smile. Not surprise, calculation adjusting trajectory. "I have always admired efficiency," Evangeline replied, "especially where succession and stability are concerned." Jasper's fork touched the plate with a hard, controlled click. "Leave the requisition." Evangeline moved forward and placed a folder beside him, but she did not step back immediately. 9 houses are requesting private audience regarding rumors spreading through lower court. I have delayed them all day, but they will press harder by morning. They worry that grief has clouded procedure." "Whose grief?" Jasper asked. "Everyone's," she said lightly, though her gaze stayed on Rowena. "The realm remains fragile. Symbols matter." Rowena felt the bond tighten, not with desire this time, but with warning, a tautness in the center of her chest that told her danger could smile and wear pearls. Evangeline was not simply a jealous noble with wounded vanity. She was infrastructure, woven into schedules, signatures, access routes, the person who could decide which rumor reached which ear by breakfast. Jasper signed the requisition without looking down, his hand steady. "You have your seal. You are dismissed. Evangeline inclined her head. As you command, my king. She left with the same measured poise, shutting the door softly behind her. Silence held for 2 breaths. Was she always like that? Rowena asked. Or did I receive a special performance? Jasper rubbed his thumb once along the edge of the folder. Evangeline was raised to become Luna somewhere important. Her family assumed that somewhere would be here. For years, she has been useful, disciplined, and very careful. Careful people are dangerous when denied what they believe is theirs. Rowena watched the closed door and felt a low thrum build beneath her ribs. She is not going to challenge me openly. No, he said. She will challenge legitimacy. It leaves cleaner hands. After dinner, he walked her back himself, but the keep had changed in subtle ways by the time they reached her corridor. 2 servants who had spoken warmly that morning now lowered their eyes and moved past as if proximity carried risk. A page delivering firewood glanced at her belly, then at Jasper, then hurried off with all the clumsy panic of someone who had heard the wrong story told too convincingly. At her chamber threshold, Jasper paused and brushed 2 fingers against the inside of her wrist, brief and deliberate. A touch that asked instead of took. Lock this from the inside, he said. Only open for my voice, Captain Brands, or Maid Lysa's. Is that caution? She asked. Or confirmation? Both. He remained outside her door that night, and though she slept in fragments again, no nightmare fully swallowed her. At dawn, Lisa arrived pale and tight-lipped with breakfast and avoided meeting Rowena's gaze until a folded scrap of parchment fell from beneath the tray cloth and landed near Rowena's hand. It was unsigned. The writing was a rough imitation of masculine script. Frostborn widow seen near West Parapet speaking with courier at second bell. Ask why a foreign pregnant claimant studies guard rotations. The note smelled faintly of rose attar and sealing wax. Rowena handed it back to Lysa. Where did this come from? Lysa swallowed. There are 6 more in servant hall, my lady. Different hands. Same accusation. By mid-morning, 3 similar messages had reached junior officers. By noon, 1 had reached council scribe. The wording changed, but the spine remained. Rowena was gathering military intelligence. Rowena was placed by Frostborn survivors. Rowena carried divided loyalty beneath a mourning veil. None of it was loud enough to accuse directly in public. All of it was designed to stain. Pressure gathered from every side. The bond tugged her toward Jasper with a warmth that felt like shelter, while grief still sat inside her like unspent lightning. Attraction rose at the worst moments, when he stood too close reading a dispatch over her shoulder, when his voice dropped to murmur legal strategy near her ear, when he met her panic with quiet competence instead of dominance. Each response from her body felt disloyal to Aldrich and unfair to herself. Yet refusing the truth did not make it disappear. I am standing in 2 rivers at once, and both are cold enough to drown me. I still love the man I buried. I am also alive beside this one. I do not know how to be honorable to memory without becoming cruel to the present. I do not know how to want safety and not mistake it for surrender. If I yield to this bond, am I faithless? If I deny it, am I lying to both of us? I am tired of being told what a good widow should look like by people who have never had to run through rain with blood on their hands. I need one choice, that is mine. That afternoon, Jasper convened a restricted council. Rowena was present by his insistence, seated beside the map table while Captain Bran pinned intercepted notes under iron daggers. The pattern was obvious once laid flat. Same wax blend, same courier channels, same distribution strategy that touched servants first, then guards, then lesser nobles who could be trusted to repeat with righteous concern. Who controls these channels? Rowena asked. Bran answered, House Blackwood oversees half the domestic postings in Winter Quarter. Jasper's expression did not change, but the runes on his forearms brightened faintly under the skin. Gather every original. No copies leave this room. Before Bran could respond, the chamber doors opened and royal healer Senna entered with her assistant, both carrying satchels and official tablets. Senna bowed to Jasper, then gave Rowena a kindly smile that did not reach her eyes. "My lady," she said, "your poison recovery requires a stronger restorative now that fever has broken. I prepared a concentrated tonic. It may cause fatigue, but it will settle the scarring in your blood channels." Jasper looked from Senna to Rowena. "Did you request this dose adjustment?" "No." Senna clasped her hands. "I made the decision by protocol. Time matters in toxic recovery." Jasper extended his hand. "Then I will review ingredients before administration." A thin pause. Senna passed over the tablet. Rowena watched Jasper scan the list, watched his gaze halt on one line, watched his jaw tighten by degrees. He handed the tablet to Bran without comment. Bran's brows drew together immediately. "Moonmint resin at this concentration," Bran said carefully, "is not standard for expectant patients." Senna lifted her chin. "The formula is modified. Safe under supervision." "By whose authorization?" Jasper asked. "Mine." His voice turned glacial. "You are relieved from direct care until inquiry concludes. Surrender your keys and records." Senna blanched. "Your Majesty, this is an overreach." "Captain." Bran stepped forward. Senna's assistant began to protest, then froze when two ward guards appeared in the doorway. The satchels were confiscated, tablets sealed, and Senna escorted out under formal restraint, her outrage echoing back through the corridor long after she vanished. When the doors shut, Jasper exhaled once and looked at Rowena, every line in his body pulled tight with restrained fury. "Did you take any tonic from her this morning?" "No." "Yesterday?" "Only broth and willow tea from Lysa." He closed his eyes briefly, relief and anger crossing his face like storm shadow over rock. "Good." The council session dissolved into urgent orders. Archive the healer ledgers. Audit apothecary inventory. Cross-reference payments from noble households in the past moon cycle. Every command pointed in one direction without naming it, and by evening, whispers had thickened into organized pressure. 4 senior houses requested a censure vote on foreign influence over the throne. 3 others signaled support if questions of mating legitimacy remained unresolved. At sunset, when the keep bells rang shift change, Rowena finally escaped to the old observatory above the western battlements, a round chamber of cracked star maps and narrow windows that showed the mountains in bruised purple light. She stood with both hands braced on the sill, breathing through the ache in her lower back, listening to wind hum through stone seams. Jasper found her there minutes later, carrying a fur-lined cloak and a cup of warm milk with honey. He did not speak at first. He draped the cloak over her shoulders and waited until she accepted the cup. "Bran confirms payment trails," he said quietly. 2 transfers from Blackwood Estate to Senna's private account, disguised as winter charity. Rowena stared out at the darkening ridges. "So it is her." "Yes." "And the letters?" "Yes." She nodded once, then surprised herself by laughing softly, one frayed thread of humor escaping under strain. "I crossed half the realm to outrun assassins with blades. I should have known the sharper knives would be polished grammar and dinner invitations." Jasper's mouth moved, almost a smile, gone as quickly as it came. He stepped beside her, close enough that his heat touched her through wool. Not so close she felt cornered. "She is aiming for censure," he said. "If enough houses invoke stability clauses, they can force public renunciation proceedings. They cannot break the bond, but they can fracture governance before winter. Can you stop it?" "Not alone without civil break." The honesty landed harder than reassurance would have. Rowena set the cup down on the stone ledge, fingers suddenly unsteady. "If this becomes choice between throne and me," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. You choose your pack. He turned fully toward her. Do not ask me to choose by pretending you are separate from my pack. She swallowed, throat thick. I am tired, Jasper. I am so tired of being the fault line everyone stands on to test whether their house will crack. I loved Aldrich. That does not vanish because fate tied a thread to my chest. I wake with his name in my mouth, and your scent in my lungs, and I do not know what that makes me. His answer came low and unguarded. It makes you human enough to hold more than one truth without breaking. Her eyes burned. I might break anyway. Then break where I can see you, not where they can weaponize it. For a long moment neither moved. Wind pressed cold against the windows. Somewhere below, wolves answered evening horn with a rolling chorus that made the old observatory glass vibrate. Jasper lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to refuse. She stepped forward instead. He cupped the side of her face, thumb resting just below her temple, and leaned his forehead to hers. No claim, no urgency, only presence. The bond between them steadied, changing from wildfire to deep current. I have been called ruthless all my life, he murmured. Most days it was true. Tonight I need you to hear this without strategy around it. I would rather lose every vote in that hall than let them reduce you to leverage. She let out a shaking breath and closed her eyes. Do not make promises you cannot keep. I do not. When they returned to her chambers, night had fully settled. Lisa waited inside with fresh linens and a sealed tray from the kitchen. She looked frightened. This arrived by special order from Lady Evangeline, Lisa whispered. She said it was an apology for earlier discourtesy. Sweet milk, saffron cakes, and calming tea for the baby. Jasper's gaze hardened. Take it to apothecary for testing. Now. Lisa lifted the tray with both hands and hurried out under guard escort. The corridor had barely quieted when Captain Bran appeared at the doorway, breathing hard from fast stairs, a packet of wax-sealed papers in one hand and urgency in every line of his stance. My king, emergency petition filed with full noble quorum. They are invoking Winter Clause 7 and demanding censure assembly at moonrise tomorrow. They attached sworn letters from 6 houses alleging Lady Rowena acted as Frostborn informant before Aldrich's death. Rowena's pulse pounded in her ears. Sworn letters based on forged notes. Bran held out the packet. There is more. One document bears your old household seal, my lady. Whoever made this had access to Frostborn impressions. Jasper took the papers, scanned the first page, and went still in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting. The runes on his arms lit bright as banked coals struck by wind. Summon legal archive, oathkeeper, and temple clerk, he said. No one sleeps tonight. Bran hesitated. There is one final line in the petition, Your Majesty. If censure passes, Council can require immediate public denial of mating claim to preserve succession order. The room seemed to narrow, air thinning to a blade. Rowena pressed one hand to her belly as the child shifted hard beneath her palm, as if answering the tension with its own fierce insistence. Through the open door she could hear the keep changing shape again, boots moving faster, voices clipped, distant bells signaling unscheduled assembly. Jasper turned to her, face set, eyes bright amber in the low light. This just became war in legal dress. And in that instant Rowena understood with brutal clarity that if she remained only protected, she would be erased. And in that instant, Rowena understood with brutal clarity that if she remained only protected, she would be erased. She took the petition from Jasper's hand and held it under the chamber lamp. 6 seals, 6 noble marks pressed in dark red wax, and at the lower edge of the page, a 7th impression stamped lightly where someone had tested the die before committing it. A crescent crossed by 3 reeds, Evangeline's household crest. The wax, Rowena said. It has rose oil in it. Bran frowned. Blackwood custom blend. Rowena looked up. The forged notes from servant hall smelled the same. Jasper's stare sharpened. You are certain? I have had 12 days in a sickbed with nothing to do but remember details I nearly died for. She set the petition down carefully. If they force censure tomorrow, they will build it on documents she controls, witnesses she purchased, and a healer she has already tried to weaponize. Bran swore under his breath, then caught himself. Jasper moved toward the door. I will call armed inquiry and seal Blackwood quarters tonight. No. Rowena's voice cracked like struck glass. Both men turned. If you raid now, she becomes martyr to half this court by dawn. They will say you silenced a noblewoman to protect your scandal. His jaw tightened. Then what do you propose? She met his gaze and for once did not ask permission to speak inside his war room. I invoke trial under full moon. Bran stared. That right has not been used since Queen Elira. Then tonight is historic. Jasper held still, weighing risk against law against survival. Trial under full moon compels public accusation and blood oath testimony. It also exposes you on the dais without guard ring. I am already exposed. At least this way the lies must stand in fire. Silence stretched, threaded with the distant rush of boots in outer corridors. Then Jasper nodded once. So ordered. Bran was gone in a heartbeat, barking commands down the hall. Temple clerk, oath keeper, moon dais prepared, summons to every petitioning house. The keep shifted into ritual motion, faster and colder than battle readiness. Rowena turned back to the papers, fingers skimming the seals again. I need one more thing. What? Proof that links Evangeline to Senna beyond payment trails. Something she did not expect anyone else to touch. Jasper's expression darkened with understanding. Her private archive. Rowena drew a breath and felt the baby press low and firm under her palm, as if reminding her exactly what she stood to lose if she miscalculated. I am going. No. She looked at him, not flinching from the force in that single word. If you go, you contaminate chain of custody and hand them another argument. If Bran goes, they call it planted by your captain. If I go alone and return with her ledger, she cannot recast this as your will. His runes flared faintly under his skin, amber edging his irises. You are not climbing stairs and breaking locks in your condition. I am not asking to break locks. She opened the door. Lysa stood just outside, clutching folded linens and trying unsuccessfully to look invisible. Lysa, Rowena said, you have carried meal trays to Blackwood Wing for years. Lysa swallowed. Yes, my lady. Show me which servant corridor feeds Lady Evangeline's record room. Jasper took one step forward. Rowena lifted her hand, not in command, not in defiance, simply a boundary. You promised you would not own me, she said softly. Keep that promise now. The tension in him was nearly tangible, a live wire held bare. At last he gave one sharp nod to Bran's nearest guard. Shadow her at distance. If she calls, you break every door between. Rowena wrapped herself in a dark cloak and followed Lysa through back passages smelling of wax, old stone, and banked hearths. Bells were ringing summons across the keep. Most noble wings stood briefly unattended as households rushed toward the moon court to secure seats and allies. In that sliver of disorder, they reached a narrow gallery behind Blackwood Apartments. Lysa pointed to a side door disguised as wall paneling. Record room. Her steward keeps the key at his belt. Rowena crouched slowly, breath controlled through the pull in her back, and examined the lock. Not intricate, merely confident. Lysa produced a thin pin from her hair with shaking hands. My brother taught me, she whispered, apologetic and proud at once. For pantry doors when we were hungry. It took 30 seconds. Inside, shelves rose to the ceiling, each lined with ledgers bound in dark leather and tagged by season. The room smelled of rose wax, ink, and cedar chests. Rowena moved straight to the desk where recent correspondence lay in sorted stacks. She found what she needed almost instantly. A ledger marked Winter Charity Disbursements, Blackwood crest embossed in silver. Pages turned, payments to temples, kitchens, widows' coal funds. Then two entries in different ink and tighter script. Escena, private relief, dosage consultation. Escena, private relief, second installment upon compliance. Rowena's pulse hammered. She tore out neither page nor cover. She lifted the whole ledger and tucked it beneath her cloak. As she turned, a small lacquer box at the desk edge caught the light. Inside lay spare wax sticks, all scented with rose oil, and the household seal dye still tacky with fresh red residue. She took both. In the corridor outside, footsteps struck stone, fast and approaching. Lisa went white. Rowena drew her into shadow behind a curtain recess as two Blackwood servants rushed past toward the moon court, arguing about seeding tears and whether Lady Evangeline had already secured proxy vows from House Marrow. Their voices faded. When Rowena reached the chamber again, Jasper was waiting at the threshold, fury and relief fighting openly across his face. She handed him the ledger. Now we end this in daylight and fire. Moonrise spread silver over the sacred clearing behind Shadowfang Keep, where the ancient dais stood ringed by black monoliths carved with oath runes. Torches lined the perimeter, but the moon did most of the work, turning frost on the stones into a pale, breathing sheen. Nobles packed the terraces in layered cloaks, murmurs rising and breaking like surf. Wolves paced the outer dark, silent witnesses with ember eyes. Rowena stood at the center of the dais in formal charcoal wool, her braid threaded with a single storm glass pin from Aldrich's signet. Jasper stood 3 steps behind her, as law required for a king called to witness rather than adjudicate. Oath-keeper Tamsin kindled the blood oath brazier. Blue-white flame rose without smoke. Evangeline Blackwood entered to a rustle of expensive fabric and calculated sympathy. She wore mourning silver, a deliberate insult wrapped as respect, and she bowed to the moon with textbook grace. Senna stood at her right under guard, wrists bound in iron thread, eyes fixed on the ground. Tamsin's voice carried across stone. By crown law and moon law, accusation must be spoken in full and tested by fire. False oath burns, truth holds. Let the petitioning side begin. Evangeline stepped forward. Her tone was warm enough to fool anyone who had not watched her hunt. I grieve for Lady Rowena's losses. We all do. But grief does not suspend duty. She arrived from a compromised court carrying active poison intelligence no courier corroborates. She has influenced military decisions while bearing the heir of another male. If the king binds to her under these circumstances, succession fractures, alliances fail, and winter deaths will follow. We request lawful censure and temporary renunciation of mating claim until lineage and loyalty are resolved. Approving murmurs moved through one side of the terraces. Evangeline continued, sharper now. We further submit sworn witness statements that Lady Rowena met secretly with Frostborn couriers and studied Shadowfang guard rotations. Tamsin took the packet and held it above the oath flame. The edges darkened but did not ignite. Rowena felt eyes on her from every angle, felt the child shift under her ribs, felt grief and rage braid into one steady line. She stepped to the brazier. My turn. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I loved my husband, she said, and the clearing stilled. He died buying my escape so I could warn this keep. I will not deny that love to make any of you comfortable. I buried him. I carry his child. Both are true. A primary crack ran through the crowd's certainty. She heard it in the sudden silence, the absence of performative murmurs. She laid one hand over her belly. I also stand bound by a thread older than your opinions. That bond did not ask whether I had finished mourning. It arrived anyway. I did not pursue it. I did not exploit it. I survived it. Her gaze found Evangeline's. And while I struggled to keep breathing, you forged documents, bought my physician, and tried to poison my pregnancy under the language of care. Evangeline laughed once, bright and contemptuous. An elegant speech. Evidence is still required. Rowena turned to Bran, who stepped forward with the seized ledger and lacquer wax box. He placed both on the oath stone. Gasps rippled through the nearest benches as Blackwood crest glinted in moonlight. I noticed identical wax scent on forged notes and on tonight's petition, Rowena said. So I collected this from Lady Blackwood's private archive. Evangeline's composure cracked. You stole from my household. I preserved proof. Tamsin opened the ledger, read the entries aloud, then held the page over Blood Oath Flame. Ink lines shone, then settled unchanged. Bran presented the wax die. Tamsin compared its impression to the tested stamp on the censure petition and the anonymous notes. Perfect match. Senna broke first. Her voice came thin, shredded by panic. She said Moonmint would only weaken the fetus enough to force bed rest. She said no one would trace dosage if I signed protocol revisions. I never meant... Evangeline spun on her. Silence. Tamsin raised her staff. Witness has spoken. Oath Flame has accepted. Chaos erupted at once, nobles shouting over one another, some demanding immediate verdict, others calling contamination, theft, procedural fraud. On the far terrace, Lord Caro rose to object and was dragged down by his own wife's grip on his sleeve. Wolves at the perimeter bristled, low thunder in their throats. Evangeline's face changed under the noise, polish peeling back to naked fury. Her hand went to her hair where an ornate silver pin held the heavy coil in place. Rowena saw the motion, too late for warning, exactly in time for choice. Evangeline yanked the pin free. A narrow blade flashed from its core, poisoned silver glinting blue in moonlight as she lunged straight for Rowena's abdomen with a snarl that tore all pretense to shreds. Rowena did not step back. She reached through the bond like grabbing a live current and called. Stormlight answered. White gold fire ripped down the visible mating thread from Jasper's chest to hers, then exploded outward in a hard arc. The blade shattered inches from her body, fragments ringing across stone. Shock slammed through her shoulder and down her spine, pain bright and clean, then transformed into a surging heat that steadied her stance instead of breaking it. Evangeline staggered, then shifted halfway, claws bursting from her fingers as she tried to vault off the moon dais into the crowd. Rowena thrust her hand forward. Chains of crackling white gold pack magic shot from the rune circle beneath her feet, wrapped Evangeline's wrists and throat, and yanked her flat against the obsidian stones. The light around the chains carried stormglass shimmer, unmistakably stormborn bloodline awakened through crown bond. The entire court saw it. Jasper moved one step behind Rowena and stopped there, exactly where judgment required, his presence a wall at her back, but not her replacement. Evangeline strained against the chains, eyes wild, teeth bared. You are a grave wife carrying another man's heir. You cannot be Luna. Rowena stood over her, breathing hard, palm still lit with residual storm fire. I buried love and still chose life. You chose envy over honor, and tonight, your title dies. Tamsin struck staff to stone 3 times. Verdict by fire and witness stands. Treason by poison conspiracy. Attempted murder on sacred dais. Sentence required. Every face turned to Jasper, his voice cut through the clearing like winter's steel. Evangeline Blackwood, by crown authority and moon law, you are stripped of rank, name right, and all estate claims. House Blackwood Holdings dissolved to Crown Trust for restitution funds. You are exiled beyond the obsidian border for life under binding runes. If you cross back, the runes will stop your heart. Evangeline spat at Rowena's feet and thrashed as wardens hauled her upright, chains still sparking. He will tire of your tears. He will remember what you are. Rowena did not flinch. He already knows. At the gate arch carved into the outer monolith ring, Tamsin carved exile sigils in air with moon salt and blood. The runes burned into Evangeline's skin as pale brands that sealed closed in real time. She screamed, voice ragged and disbelieving, as the gate flared black silver and swallowed her into the wastes beyond Shadowfang jurisdiction. When the light collapsed, the clearing went utterly still. Then, one by one, nobles knelt. Not all. Enough. Jasper's hand found Rowena's at last, trembling once before tightening with controlled certainty. The bond between them pulsed too bright, too fast, as if the trial had ripped it open wider than either body could safely carry. Rowena swayed. Jasper caught her elbow. Tamsin stepped closer, eyes narrowed as she tracked the visible thread of moonfire still burning between their chests. You forced storm power through an incomplete bond during lethal threat. The channel is overstrained. If it remains unfinished, it will keep draining both of you. Jasper's expression sharpened. Define unfinished. You recognized but did not seal. Marks are absent. Completion is no longer ceremonial. It is medical. The child kicked hard, and pain flashed along Rowena's old poison scars like heated wire. She hissed. Temple, Jasper said. The moon temple sat within the keep's inner wall, a circular chamber open to the night sky, where silver water ran in a shallow ring around a raised stone altar. Priests withdrew at Tamsin's gesture, leaving only lamplight, moonlight, and the sound of water over carved rock. Rowena stood with her back to a pillar, breath unsteady, palms damp. Jasper faced her across one pace of stone, cloak discarded, runes blazing from wrist to shoulder. Power rolled off him in visible waves, dangerous and leashed. Choice, Tamsin said quietly. Always choice. Speak it or step away. Jasper removed the torque at his throat and set it on the altar, then knelt and bowed his head, baring the side of his neck above his collar in deliberate vulnerability no king offered lightly. His voice was rough with restraint. Rowena Stormborn, mine only if you say yes, yours even if you say no. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened. She stepped forward until their knees touched and lifted his chin with both hands. Yes. Tamsin nodded once and retreated to the water ring. Jasper rose slowly, giving her every chance to pull back. May I mark you? Yes? He cupped the back of her neck and her jaw, thumbs brushing her skin in a touch that grounded instead of consumed. When his mouth found the junction of her shoulder and neck, his breath warmed the place first, a warning and a promise. Then his fangs sank in with controlled force. Pain came sharp, clean, immediate. Rowena's fingers clenched in his shirt. A cry escaped her throat and broke into a shudder as heat flooded from the bite through every channel the poison had scarred. What hurt transformed, not into numbness, but into vivid aliveness, pulse after pulse washing silver fire through her veins. She tasted cedar and rain as if scent had become liquid on her tongue. The bond roared open, then steadied, wider and deeper than before. Jasper pulled back, lips blood-warm against her skin, eyes bright amber and unguarded. Mine, he whispered, reverent, not possessive. Rowena slid her hand to his nape and drew him down. Yours. She turned her head to the offered line of his throat above the pounding pulse, inhaled once, and bit. He jerked under the contact, a strangled sound torn from somewhere ancient. The taste that met her was iron, cedar smoke, winter rain, and a wild certainty that felt like standing on a mountain edge in storm wind with both feet planted. Heat surged from her mouth into him, then back into her, an exchange rather than a taking. Under her palm, his runes flared white gold and then settled into a new pattern. When she released him, crescent sigils glowed on both their marks, mirrored perfectly. Mate, he breathed. The word crossed the last distance between them and locked into place. The chamber shifted. Water around the altar rose in a brief spiral without wind, then dropped. Above them, clouds parted, moonlight striking both marks at once. The mating thread that had burned ragged between their chests softened into a steady luminous cord, no longer tearing, no longer starving. Rowena sagged with sudden relief so profound it bordered on grief. Jasper wrapped both arms around her, careful of her belly, and held her against his chest while the tremors worked through her body and eased. "No hunger without you," he whispered against her hair. She closed her eyes, forehead to his throat, where her own mark still pulsed warm. "No fear with you. Mine. Yours. Mate. Mate." They stayed like that until their breathing matched, and the bond settled from blaze to deep current, present in every heartbeat but no longer painful. When they finally looked up, Tamsin was smiling in the small, private way of someone who had seen too much suffering and still believed in repair. "By moon law," she said, "it is complete." At first thaw, the great hall filled again, this time not for censure, but for decree. Rowena stood beside Jasper on the dais in dark blue velvet stitched with silver crescents, her mark visible above the collar by her choice. Nobles packed the benches, captains lined the walls, servants stood in open gallery tiers where they could hear every word. Bran announced sentences first. Senna was stripped of office and confined to temple labor under watch for 10 years, all healer wages diverted to families harmed by falsified treatment. Caro and Ven's speaking rights were restored after formal apology under guest right statute, and a punitive levy paid into the same restitution fund. Blackwood estates were dissolved, their grain reserves reassigned to winter kitchens and orphan houses by Crown trustees. He then read the completed audit and war courier findings into record. The Black Ledger procurement cells identified in Shadowfang, Frostborn, and 3 allied river territories had been dismantled under joint warrants. Seizure crews burned contaminated stores, recertified elite and public kitchens, and reopened supply roads under bonded inspectors. Frostborn-linked brokers who moved tasteless toxin through stewarded contracts were tried by combined tribunal, with principal operators neutralized and assets forfeited to restitution. Bran's final report named the command cadre behind the Frostborn night breach: a compromised guard captain and 2 procurement officers who executed the assault under falsified household authority. One died resisting capture. The others were convicted and sentenced under Frostborn military law, and the surviving strike cell was broken. Then Jasper stepped back and inclined his head to Rowena. The room registered it like thunder. Rowena laid her decree scroll on the lectern and let her voice carry. "As High Luna of Shadowfang, I establish protected status under Crown law for widows, unmated mothers, and orphaned pups in every territory under this throne. None may be displaced from upper wards by change of marital rank. None may be confined for political convenience. Stipends will be issued from Crown Trust each moon. Sanctuary houses will be staffed and guarded. Any violation is treason." A murmur swelled. Not all approval, but stunned recognition that the old weapon had just been broken in statute. She continued, softer and somehow stronger. "Grief is not disloyalty. Survival is not shame." From the side gallery, Lysa pressed both hands to her mouth, tears bright on her cheeks. Bran struck fist to chest in formal assent. One by one, captains followed. Then many of the nobles did too. Some sincere, some prudent, all bound by witness. At the council feast that followed, long tables were set with winter game, breads, and steaming bowls. Jasper remained standing at the head until Tamsin and temple acolytes came forward with silver bells and laid a gentle hand over Rowena's belly. The baby's heartbeat thrummed strong beneath her palm, and the priestess's smile deepened. "Both heartbeats blessed," Tamsin declared. Only then did Jasper lift his cup and begin the feast. By spring thunder, rain drummed the palace eaves in warm sheets, and the air smelled of wet earth instead of iron snow. In the birthing chamber, moonstone lamps glowed low while Rowena gripped Jasper's hand through the final push, and the world narrowed to breath, pain, and fierce determination. When their daughter arrived, furious and loud, lightning split the sky beyond the shutters, and both parental marks flared in answer, crescents bright as new forged silver. "She has your lungs," Jasper said hoarsely, cradling the tiny bundled weight with awe that stripped him younger than power ever allowed in public. "And your stubborn jaw," Rowena managed, laughing and crying at once. They named her Elowen Aldra Shadowfang for living light and remembered love. Jasper spoke Aldrich's name without hesitation at the naming hearth, and the gesture settled something old and aching inside Rowena that no decree could touch. That night, after congratulations faded and the keep quieted to rain and distant patrol calls, Rowena sat wrapped in blankets in the moonlit courtyard garden. Jasmine had just begun to bloom along the southern wall. Elowyn slept between her and Jasper in a carved cradle lined with wolf-soft fur, one tiny fist tucked under her chin. Jasper knelt beside Rowena's chair, lifted her marked shoulder to his lips, and kissed the crescent there with slow, deliberate tenderness. No audience, no politics. Only the three of them and the soft rhythm of their daughter's breathing. Rowena ran her fingers through his hair and looked out over Shadowfang Keep. Light steady in every wing, patrol torches moving in practice peace along the walls. Not perfect, never guaranteed, but real and chosen. Her mate, her child, her law written into stone. When Jasper looked up, his amber eyes held no hunger now except the quiet, enduring kind built from vow after vow kept in daylight. She touched his cheek and felt the bond answer, calm and secure as a heartbeat under her hand. "No fear with you," she thought again, and this time the thought carried no edge of desperation at all.